Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Liza Schoenfein is a journalist who writes about food. She describes flavors, ingredients, cooking techniques, and dishes in delicious tones and with abundant pleasure. Hello, Liza.
Hi.
You like to eat too, don't you?
I love to eat.
Do all food writers love food? I think they have to, don't they?
You know, you would think so, but I had an interesting conversation with somebody once who was convinced that a lot of food writers are actually afraid of food, and they write about it to work out their fears, but that's not me. I actually adore food.
That's sort of like people going into psychology because they need some therapy or something. Nowadays, there's such an emphasis on quality of food, it seems to me. So we're given a broad choice of organic foods or regular foods. Is there a significant difference, and is it worth the price differential?
I think there is. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful, I was going to say trend. I hope it's not a trend. I hope it's just really the way we're moving. I think that people want to know where their food comes from. More and more, there's all sorts of issues with different foods, and whether it's mercury in fish or whether it's, you know, they're all different kinds of scares. So I think people want to know, and I think that the fact that we're now able to get food that we know has been grown in a responsible way, I think people are very happy about that.
Do you think that eventually that will lead? It's an interesting thought. I mean, can you regulate then how food is manufactured, how food is developed, and regulate it so that all food becomes organic? Will farmers have to switch to organics? I don't know.
That would be nice. I don't think that's going to happen, but I know that you can certainly regulate what you call organic, and which has both good and bad things about it. I think that it's very hard to put the label organic on something, and there are a lot of small farmers who would like to, but they have to go through so much to do it.
FDA? Who covers that? I don't know. Department of Agriculture? Someplace.
I'm not sure.
And what about food from farmers markets?
Well, some of it's organic and some of it isn't. I think it has to, if it's labeled organic, it has to be organic, and you can choose. But, you know, it doesn't have to be organic, labeled organic, and which means that it's past all of these particular, you know, to be good food that comes from a small farm and has been grown carefully and responsibly.
And it would be the same as, but it's fresher than the food that lands up in a supermarket because you don't have the days of traveling and all of that.
Sure, absolutely. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, I did a story about cheese for Organic Style magazine, and I met these wonderful cheesemakers, and a couple in particular in Vermont or Weaver Farm. They can't call themselves organic because it's too, they couldn't possibly do it. They have just a few Jersey cows, and if one of them gets sick, they can't give it antibiotics if they're called organic. So that was why they chose not to actually put the, you know, go organic, but they really are. And when you eat that cheese, you're not getting antibiotics, but if their cow gets sick, they're going to treat it. So.
The food that lately also I've read and hear that frozen vegetables are just as good, if not better, sometimes than fresh vegetables. I guess it depends on the seasons and what you're eating.
I think that you can find really wonderful frozen vegetables now, which, you know, frozen food obviously was the huge thing in the 50s, and then it kind of went completely out of style. And you always do hear chefs say, well, except for frozen peas, because with peas, unless you shell fresh peas, throw them into the boiling water immediately and, you know, serve them up, they're going to be starchy and not that good. But frozen peas have actually been...
Even if they stay in the pod?
Right. Well, after a while, they get starchy.
So they're
the sugars turn to starch. So frozen peas, they've done that work for you. They've thrown them into, you know, they've flash frozen them or whatever, and they're sweet and wonderful. And I think a lot of chefs use frozen peas. I know I use them.
There's a difference, isn't there, with the flash frozen and other frozen, or the frozen food that comes in bags versus frozen food that comes in boxes?
Yeah, but don't ask me to.
Okay. I just read that frozen food that comes in bags is preferable.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm not quite sure why.
But I think you're right. And but now there's this amazing frozen food from places like Trader Joe's. That I've discovered amazing haricots verts, where, you know, the little French string beans. And you can't tell, and it's great to just have them in the freezer, and, you know, at times when maybe nothing looks good in the store.
You're much younger than I am, but when I grew up, you know, pasta was spaghetti.
Right.
String beans were string beans.
Lettuce was probably iceberg.
Iceberg. So is this is all part of an international influence in developing? I mean, were chefs as much as stars
No,
earlier?
that's definitely a new thing, and something that's been happening for I mean, certainly not new, but it is a big thing with food TV too. I think it's getting more into the middle of the country, whereas it used to be, I think, the coasts really were where food was a focus, and famous chefs were a focus. And you know, you had in the 70s Alice Waters in California, but now it's really moving toward the middle, and I had this amazing experience that illustrates this, which is that I was in Birmingham, Alabama over Christmas, and I had to get something at the Target, and they had a super Target, which is the one that has the groceries, and I couldn't believe that I was in a Target in Birmingham, Alabama, and it was full of every kind of lettuce you can imagine, from radicchio to frise, and every kind of tomato in yellow, orange, red, different sizes. They had every kind of chili pepper. You could get anything you want. They had prepared sushi, they had soups, they had really great looking food. And I thought, you know, a few years ago, it was hard to find anything, you know, outside of the New York and California. It was really hard to find specialty lettuces. Nobody knew, you know, what any of that was.
So so food is really now influenced by television again. I mean, it's another part of our lives that is developing. The television people are stars. They show all these different recipes. They bring all these new ingredients into the country. It's really, it's very interesting. Food fads. Do we change periodically? Is there always this kind of
remember foam
wave?
a few years ago? Everything had foam on the top, and you know, there are definitely trends, and I think it also has to do with, I don't know what comes first, but you also have these diet trends. So if nobody's eating carbs, then chefs are making much more protein heavy and vegetable heavy.
It wasn't too long ago that everything was pasta.
Right.
Right. And so then we have this nation which suffers from obesity on the one side and has all of this diet conscious thing on the other. Where does it all come together? Do you have any thoughts about that?
The one thing that I'm very optimistic, because I think as food gets better and as people start watching a lot of food TV, which I really think is a great thing, because I do think that it's teaching people to broaden their horizons in terms of what they cook at home, and also what they look for in restaurants, that as people start to absorb that stuff, they're going to eat better, because maybe there are a lot of alternatives to fast food and to just boiling water and making a big pasta, although I think pasta's terrific. I have no fear of carbs at all. I just have fear of huge portions. So.
Well, that's another thing. We'll get to that. Yeah. I cooked soba noodles last night. Now, how does that fit into pasta? What are soba noodles?
Soba, I think soba noodles are buckwheat.
Yes.
And it's a Japanese influence.
Yeah. And so that's not as bad as a white starched pasta.
Well, I think always whole grains, multigrains, brown food is better than white food.
And we've learned that. We should tell people that we met at Weight Watchers. I mean, you have less of a reason to go than I do.
Thank you, but
but it's all right. And when one of the things that is the trait is that we eat too much, or we eat as if we're never going to eat again.
Yes, and our wonderful Weight Watchers leader Diane always says, "Are you ever going to see that again?" Because we look at if we're at a party and there's something beautiful out there, we think, I've got to get it now because I may never see this kind of wonderful food again. But of course, it's always going to be there.
Right.
But I think that what I've learned at Weight Watchers is that it really doesn't matter whether it's carbs or protein or whatever. It's just a question of getting a balance and eating the right, a smaller amount. Basically.
So people, I mean, what you also learn is how many food problems people really have and how deep it goes.
It's interesting. It is. It's like
food and eating is one of the major things in our lives, right?
I know, and for so many people, I do think it goes back to what they ate as a child, or how they were approached about food as a child, if their parents force-fed them or told them not to eat this or that or whatever. I think everyone has issues. It's true.
When I grew up, of course, it was in the Depression, and people ate apples, and if they, you saw pictures of people standing online just to get an apple to eat because people were hungry and living in shanties some places in the country. So it was always clean your plate, and then later it was think of the refugees in Europe. So we were brought up to really clean the plate. So now I clean everybody's plate in the family.
Well, it's understandable. Hard. See, it really is. Absolutely.
You wrote about children and food.
I have.
And that's an interesting subject. You have 2 children?
I do. I have 2 boys, Rex and Teddy. Rex is 7.5, and Teddy is going to be 2 this week.
That's so tell us about what you do with kids.
Well, my kids, they do pretty much eat everything, and I don't necessarily think it's anything that I've done, although we've certainly exposed them to everything, but I know a lot of people who expose their kids to a lot of great food, and their kids still won't touch anything. My kids, my favorite food story with my son Rex is that when he was about 3 years old, we visited friends in Chicago, and we had, he was eating with us. We have a lot of people over. We have people over for drinks or for dinner. And there, at the time when he was little, there was this great little gourmet shop on the Upper West Side, which has closed. It was called La Piccola Cucina. It was up on Broadway on 107th. And they had amazing fresh bread and roasted vegetables and goat cheese. And I used to buy this, and this is what I would put out when I had friends coming over for dinner. I'd pick it up on my way home from work and put it on the table, and everyone would just eat it for cocktails. And Rex would go crazy for it, and he loved this goat cheese. We went to Chicago to visit friends of ours, and a friend of mine said, "Now, Rex, what would you like to eat?" And she said, "Here, would you like a piece of cheese?" And she handed him a Kraft single in the plastic. He had never seen this before, and he took a look at it, and he said, "Do you have goat cheese?" And my food snob kid.
Now, where did he get the name Rex? I love that.
That's a good question. My father was Robert, and I wanted to name him Robert, but I didn't want to call him Robert. I wanted there to be some, I wanted him to have his own name, and also my brother-in-law is Rob, and he's also the godfather, so we wanted something different, and we were thinking, well, what are short names for Robert, and we really couldn't come up with anything, and I was pregnant out to here, and we were in a movie. And in the credits, at the opening credits, there was a Rex, and Mark, my husband, went, "Rex." And it was a terrible movie. Throughout the whole movie, I didn't watch the movie, I just sat there going,
Rex.
Rex. Rex. And by the end of the movie, he was Rex.
And he's going to be the only one in his class, most likely, until you make it popular.
Once in a while, we meet a Rex, and it's really exciting.
When you go to restaurants, so tell me about your kids. How do you get them to...
Well, they really do love to eat everything, although I do have to say that when Rex got into kindergarten, around that time, he did start to get a little more picky and a little more, the foods that the other kids were eating were the things that he wanted, the macaroni and cheese and the pizza and all of that, which I've never deprived him of those things, but he's just always had a very, very wide range. They mostly eat what we eat. And I'm not a you have to eat that or there's nothing else. If they really don't like it, then I certainly give them something else.
And you take them marketing sometimes?
I do, and also we cook together. And one of the stories I wrote about cooking with kids was how to interest kids in food, and one of the things I said was take them shopping, take them into the kitchen and help them prepare. And I think at all ages, kids can do something. Even Teddy could put, the bread in the bread basket, or could, or could push and help me spin the lettuce. We have one. I'm doing this because that's our lettuce spinner is an OXO, and you go like this. And and then Rex helps me we make meatballs together, and he loves to make the meatballs and form them. And then they're the best meatballs he's ever tasted because he's made them, and he'll try anything that he's made. And I've also written about doing pizzas where you put out bowls with different vegetables and encourage them to make a face with the slices of mushroom or bell peppers, and then they'll taste it. Because it's part of the face. If they wouldn't go near a bell pepper, if it's the mouth of their pizza face, maybe they will.
So that's very... Do you make up recipes, or?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Do you mean in general or for magazines? In general, I do.
Yeah.
What I tend to do, I have a lot of cookbooks, and the way I tend to cook is that I think, what do I want to eat? And say it's lamb shanks. Then I'll kind of look through all my cookbooks for inspiration on lamb shanks. Or if I want it to be kind of a Moroccan influence, I'll go toward the Middle Eastern, or North African kind of sections of my cookbooks, and I just get ideas, and then I tend to wing it. But I've done enough cooking that I know what the proportions should be, and if I don't, then I refer to the cookbooks.
I'm not a serious cook. I have a daughter and son-in-law who really are serious cooks because his parents are serious cooks, but I'm not. But I must say that when I cook, I sort of like paint pictures. I mean, I have the taste of what I want it to taste like. And I look in the refrigerator. I sometimes look at a cookbook also. I look in the refrigerator and I see whatever leftovers I have, and I keep a lot of things. I don't like to throw food.
Oh, that's good.
And then I use them in something else, and I really have fun about it. It's,
that's
you know,
great.
it's exciting. It's also difficult when you've cooked for a lot of people to then cook for 2 people, and I think it must be very hard to cook for 1 person.
Yeah.
And I think that becomes a problem. So then when you go to restaurants, what do you eat? And where do you go?
Well, you know, that's changed over the past couple of years. I used to be such a huge carnivore. I love meat, and when I went to restaurants, I would, you know, I would skip over all of the fish and everything, and the chicken, forget that. And I would look at, you know, I want the porterhouse, or I want the ossobuco or whatever. But I've really gone more toward fish, and and there's such an amazing variety, and I'm actually very excited because there's a lot of wonderful fish restaurants opening in New York right now, and there's a new one, not so new, but there's within the past year, there's one on the Upper West Side that I like called the Neptune Room.
Where is that?
It's on Amsterdam in the 80s, about 85th Street, and they have a wonderful crudo, the Italian word for the raw stuff, at the beginning, if you like that kind of thing, and just great variety and wonderful fresh fish. And I love eating now. You know, now I eat much more that way, and I'll start with oysters or something. You know, those things have no calories. And so a glass of wine and some oysters to me is heaven, and it's so much lighter than.
You get to be that way. I mean, that's really interesting, and that follows the fad and whatever health.
That's
and
right.
the fad follows what the health things are and what the diets are.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing.
Yeah. I'm thrilled about all the new fish places, because I do see, I don't know if you've noticed, but I do see a lot of new fish places.
Are they very
opening.
expensive? Historically, fish restaurants have always been very expensive.
Well, I'll tell you one that is and one that isn't. There's a brand new restaurant opening called BLT Fish from Laurent Torondel, the wonderful chef who has BLT steak already, which is terrific. But so I'm very excited about that because fish is his specialty, and that's, I think, just opening this week.
Where is that? Do you know?
Oh, I wish you hadn't asked.
Know.
I'm not
sorry.
sure.
I read about it.
But another one that's very reasonable and fun and funky is down in the East Village called the Mermaid Inn, and it's owned by, and the chef is Jimmy Bailey, who has the Red Cat in Chelsea, which is a great, fun restaurant. And it's very funky, casual, inexpensive, and the wine list is very small but really well chosen, very inexpensive, and I love it, in the summer especially. But they've got a little garden out back, and it's adorable, and it's very reasonably priced.
We used to, when I was very young, we used to have a place called White's on 57th Street, West 57th Street, in the Park Vendôme things. It was a very big seafood restaurant. And then, I can't remember the name, but I think it was Patty's on West 34th Street, which was one of those places with long tables, a mess, paper plates, you know, and that kind of stuff. And it was just terrific. And it was so inexpensive and so much fun to go to. But of course, everything was inexpensive. I think that my late husband, my other husband, I never know how to describe them, had a menu from Rockefeller Center, from the Rainbow Room, and I think that the dinner was something like 75 cents or $1.25. So that shows you how prices have gone, and the price of food in New York is really staggering.
It really is. Isn't the price of everything in New York really staggering? Yes. Suddenly, I was talking to my husband about this just last week, how everything seems to have gone up.
The cost of living, there was a story about it. The cost of living has increased more here than any place else, and by almost
and more
5%.
Than people's raises, exactly, because people are getting these piddly little 3% raises.
And we don't have, we've always been deprived of supermarkets here, of quality supermarkets. So we have Fairway, which is a great place, but it's such a novelty really for us. And now we have Whole Foods, which always is fun. And
it is fun. I love having all the variety.
It's
not as complete, and I also find it a little hard to navigate. And it's so big, but kind of weirdly organized. So I find that I'm all the way over here, and then
you remember
I need the milk, and I have to go back. How
did you get to be a food writer?
Well, I went to journalism school, and I did other things. And
you grew up in New York.
I grew up in New York, and then I went to Northwestern for journalism school and met my husband in Chicago. And then I was working, and I was editing and doing all sorts of different sort of general interest stuff. And I was working at Entertainment Weekly at the time, and it was the summer. And my mother, who is a wonderful cook, and I grew up cooking with my parents. My dad took Chinese cooking classes, and we used to go down to Chinatown on Saturdays. And I always loved food, and I loved being in the kitchen with my parents. And as you can see, I love talking about food. And my mom and I were cooking one summer day at her house in Connecticut. And we were talking about what we were making, what we had eaten yesterday, and what we were about to make and eat, and then what we were going to eat tomorrow, which is what we always do. You know, when you're eating one meal, you're talking about what are we going to do for the next meal. Right. And I remember what we were making. We were making a panzanella salad, an Italian bread salad, and we were just having so much fun. And she turned to me and she said, "You are so much more animated when you talk about food than when you talk about anything else." She said, "You know, I hear you talk about your job, and it just doesn't sound. You don't sound like this." She said, "Can't you combine food and journalism? Aren't there food journalists?" And I said, "I think there are." And it was a click. And then strangely, and I think this is sometimes the way the world works, or at least it was the way the world worked in this case, I got a call a week and a half later from someone looking for a food editor. And it was at Home Arts, the website that no longer exists. It was at Hearst. And they were starting a women's website. And they needed somebody to work on the Good Housekeeping site. They were putting some of the Hearst magazines online, but everyone was going to be wearing two hats. And can you do Good Housekeeping? And by the way, do you know anything about food? Because we need that person that we're hiring for the Good Housekeeping site to also run the food area of this site. And I said, yes, I do. And I got the job, and that was the beginning of food.
So you also wrote a column about a woman named Rose who makes bread.
Yes, and Rose Levy-Berenbaum. Right,
and
she's wonderful.
She also talked about the serendipity of life. I mean, I've always had, this is a pet peeve of mine, when young people are starting out in life and somebody says, well, where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
Who knows?
Well, how do you know? And it takes such serendipitous turns and everything, and
Absolutely.
so you're just proof of that.
Yes, and I've been very lucky because I've had the kind of career where I've been able, I think because of what I do, it's been very conducive to my family life, and I've been able to kind of go in and out of working on staff somewhere and then working at home and being in my kitchen a lot, which is my favorite place, and having my kids there. And so it's been great.
And you've also done a little writing about parenting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
you've
been writing is a wonderful career. It's so adaptable.
It is. Absolutely. My sister's in marketing, and she says, look, it's only in this kind of a career where you can bring it home. I don't really have clients except the magazines that I write for, but my talents are, completely portable. So,
let's go back to food and restaurants. Why do people spend so much money to go to a restaurant that is so crowded and so noisy that you can't talk to anybody or you can't hear anybody? I mean, why?
I guess because they think that they're going to get something wonderful out of it, and I think that the trouble is very often you don't. I mean, you go and you have a bad experience, and I think also people are then, well, I am veering into bad experiences, which is maybe not where you wanted to go.
Go ahead.
But I don't know. I think people are excited to try new things, and that's terrific, and to try new experiences, and to go where, to a place that's been written up or that's hot, and and then they'll settle for not so great, but hopefully they'll go to a place and it really will be great. And some people don't mind the noise. I do. I like to have a conversation.
I can't stand the noise.
Yeah,
and it's gotten, and the older I get, the harder it gets. And the music and the loud beep and the crowded tables and the uncomfortable chairs.
Yeah.
We're really talking about sophisticated people, though, aren't we?
Mostly. Well, and there aren't that many people who actually can afford to drop, $100 a person or more on a meal. And now with all the Time Warner Center restaurants, or what is it? I think it ends up being $400 a person or something.
We were treated to one very fancy tasting meal at the Essex House. Who was that? Who's got the restaurant, the very expensive restaurant? I mean,
isn't that L'Espinasse?
Yes,
but
I
it
guess
closed.
it is.
Yeah.
Was it L'Espinasse? I don't know.
I think so.
And frankly, it was all so royal.
Yeah.
It just wasn't the kind of place for us to go at. I felt terrible for the host because he had like 8 people there for dinner. It cost a fortune.
Isn't that awful
disgusting.
when you don't like it? I mean, honestly, I'm so much happier to go slurp oysters or go someplace in the neighborhood. There's so many neighborhoody places on the Upper West Side, and I'm very happy. Of course, I love a wonderful restaurant, and there are amazing experiences to be had.
It's an experience. It's almost like the Gates in Central Park. it's something that everybody should experience, but do you want to live with it forever?
Right. No, which is why it was only 16 days.
Right.
But
it's true. It's and it's a pretension, I think, or it's sort of like the beautiful clothes. It's like we were talking before about the handbags that are now selling for $5,000,
right.
or it's not even expensive if it's $1,200. I mean,
but people buy them.
I know.
I know. But
It's
you know,
only
the worst.
the only people who buy them are people who have friends who know that they've bought, that recognize them, right? I mean,
yes.
What's the point?
I don't know, but I'll tell you, the worst is, I mean, say you buy a handbag and you spend that kind of money and then it falls apart. You have to make sure you're going somewhere, to do the restaurant parallel, where you are going to have a wonderful time. And if you're not, you have to mention it, I think, to the, I really do. We were having, I won't actually name the restaurant because I don't want to say we had a bad experience there, but we were at a restaurant that I love, and it was just such an off night. Our waitress, I think, was completely overwhelmed. We got soup. There were no soup spoons. It took 10 minutes. By then the soup was cold before we got our soup spoons. Then the main course came and the inside was cold. It hadn't been heated up. They were very busy. It was a Saturday night and it was terrible, but I did say something finally, and you have to do it in a nice way. But I said, this is just, we come here all the time and this is not a good night. And they took the entire main course off off the bill, and a good place will do that. But there are places, you want to talk about my restaurant pet peeves? Do we have time?
We only have 30 seconds.
Oh, then forget it. My main one is when they keep bringing the Pellegrino, even though you've ordered one, and you get the bill, and you think, wow, I'm going to float home. How did I drink this much Pellegrino? And then you see that they kept opening bottles.
So in 30 seconds, eat healthy. I mean, what?
Yeah, I think eat what you love. And enjoy your food, and that I think is the thing. If you
sit down at a table,
sit down and make it a nice experience, and don't say I'm never going to have chocolate cake, but have a taste or a couple of bites, but and enjoy it.
We didn't even discuss French women and how they eat,
but
which
I think
is
maybe
that way.
that's the way.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Liza Schoenfein, and we look forward to hearing from you again.